The world of speculative design affords us the liberty of approaching urban planning through lenses we would have conventionally disregarded as overly ambitious or impractical. Of course, one can argue that all design is speculative until we break ground, but an intentional practice of speculative design can lead one to some very thought provoking solutions to global problems. This was also the case with Depanshu Gola from Architecture for Dialogue, who tried addressing the problem of migrant farmers, decreasing farmlands, increasing costs of production and transportation by proposing to convert public spaces in his hometown Delhi into urban farmlands. In today's conversation, we think out loud about unused garden spaces outside malls, the function of terrace gardens, and farmers as service providers. I am Vaissnavi Shukla, and this is Architecture of Center, a podcast where we highlight contemporary discourses that shape the built environment, but do not necessarily occupy the center stage in our daily lives. We speak to radical designers, thinkers, and changemakers who are deeply engaged in redefining the way we live and interact with the world around us. So, Depanshu, you're from Delhi and you're native to Delhi. Were you born and raised in Delhi?
I'm born and brought up in Old Delhi specifically.
Wonderful. So you have 3 decades of experience to talk about Delhi.
3 years, 30, observations, I think.
Observations. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as a resident of Delhi, tell us what you think is the relationship between the food and the city. Okay. This is like an open-ended question. So we know your thesis and your work within Architecture for Dialogue was based on the design of a mandi. I think that's kind of like the point of genesis. Tell us what got you interested in agricultural studies from an architectural perspective.
Yeah, okay. I think I'll also start with your first question, which is almost like, what is the relationship of food and the city for me, in all my experiences. I mean, first thing when you say to anybody about Delhi, so first thing that comes to your mind is the street food or, all those cuisines. So that's one side of thing, which is, a lot about these spices and all of it. Where I also felt now, in my retrospection, there is also another layer, which is we are also at the same time disconnected with our food, which is like any other city, because in cities we are getting all these resources, but we really don't know where are they coming from. We are quite oblivious about their production, let's say. And I think I'm also basing it on just the food aspect right now. But yeah, that's also how I felt, and that has been my on and off feeling whether when I, kind of started thinking about, okay, what I have to do in my thesis as well, even in practice. So that is the kind of layer I think I just want to respond to when you said, what is the relationship of food in the city? Then I think coming to your second question, how I got interested in this agricultural studies from architectural perspective, it's honestly, I mean, if I can just specifically talk about my thesis time. So in that, I think two things were kind of guiding me. First, that I think I was quite done with responding to just these mainstream briefs. I wanted, as a person, I am always curious to explore new typologies. And for that, I thought, responding to a new brief could do that. And then I started exploring what all you can do. And being like a shallow architecture student, most, I think I was quite interested in these urban farming and skyscraper. There were these futuristic towers that people talk about, and I was like, okay, here is this thing, something interesting, which is about, when you talk about urban farming or even these skyscrapers, how would they look like, or they kind of respond to Delhi as a context? So I think that was the kind of first thing where I started, and almost then got into this really long tunnel about, knowing where my food is coming from, what is this whole chain, food production chain, what is happening there, and then, uh, another brief which is coming from faculty. Okay, you have to make a building. So why don't you just see a building where this can happen? And interestingly, while I was studying this food production journey, I kind of arrived at this mandi as like the center point where almost this is literally a point where producers, like farmers and consumers, us, we are kind of meeting on that hub. I mean, you can not say quite literally because a lot of people even don't go to mandis as well. But how this is almost like the first touch point for any farmers or producer in cities.
So for whoever's not from the region and doesn't know what a mandi is, can you draw like a audio visual picture of walking into a mandi?
Oh, that's interesting. Let me try. Let me give my shot at that. So mandi. So in as a formal term, it will be like wholesale food market, where basically the
And so
operations are
food, we mean
happening
like
at
fresh produce, as in just like fruits and vegetables, mostly.
fruits and vegetables, right? Yeah, in this case, mostly fruits and vegetables. So in this case, majorly these are like operations which are happening at a bigger scale or like a
Sure.
wholesale, when we say, and then in that thing, it's very much logistic, like it's a logistic operation, and it doesn't cater much to public as such. So that's what a mandi is. When you go into a mandi, it's like a full chaos, and it's kind of you're like, okay, so much is happening, so much of food, and things are getting packed, things are getting moved from this point to another point. There are these auction areas where people would do these auctions of their products. There are these different agents like these commission agents. So there is like a big operation. So I think people who are listening to this, I would just urge them, if they can find mandi or like a wholesale fruit and vegetable market within their place, have a visit over a weekend. Take your friends with you, along you, and just you'll have an amazing time. And it's also a good experience to just literally know where your food is coming on, almost like the first step when you start to look at that from a city developer perspective. So I mean, so yeah, and getting back to the main thing, like in my thesis, what so taking mandi as a typology, the intent for that thesis was that, okay, mandi as a typology, what can we intervene from a very design perspective, that in this whole talk about urban farming, which is basically, you do farming within urban areas, how will that add to it, in the sense that a lot of people are already talking about urban farming. People are saying, okay, you can do terrace farming as well, but somehow people are not doing it, or it's not getting to that mass adoption level. So as a hypothesis, that was kind of my idea, that what if architecture or the design can take that role, and all the a physical infrastructure that can literally act as this knowledge hub, where farmers would come in, where consumers also come in, and this is kind of start to uh, talk about, or kind of share this knowledge about farming and what can we do, and where this can go from that point. So that was like literally from a very building perspective, and that's what kind of I did. And almost as a typological interventions, what I figured is that when you see mandi as a building, it's almost a very flat land, almost like a factory setup, where you would see they have like these large roof areas where they are literally vacant or nothing is happening. So as just an idea, that was a proposed thing, that what if you kind of create that into like a large farming area within mandi. And this is again not really saying that oh, that can really cater to a good amount of people, like that food production, but it is almost on the lines of that, how this will kind of act as that knowledge hub, where you can have like different functions, like whether you can have like an organic cafe, or there can be these maybe weekend festivals, or like a farmer market, where you are literally engaging with the food, as a culinary experience. So yeah, I think that was the kind of thing that I tried to do in my thesis.
So that's kind of like the origin story or the moment of genesis, which actually propelled you into like a whole different inquiry. So you founded an experimental research-based studio called Architecture for Dialogue with your friend and partner, or did you guys go to architecture school?
We are like college buddies.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about this, like how we have just taken. It's almost been like what 11 years now of just literally being together or working together.
Yeah. So you guys take up some very nice projects and some very interesting inquiries within broadly art, design, planning. I mean, you work across spectrums, right? So I want to talk about this one particular speculative design project that you had, which was called Delhi Agro-City 2050. So you're imagining what the city where you've grown up and you belong from would look like were it to change its mode and methods of existence. So couple of points. So considering the rise in population and the mass migration to urban areas, you are kind of proposing or hypothesizing that cities do have the potential to be agricultural centers, like centers for agricultural production, which is radical in the sense that most people seem to be gravitating towards an urban life or uh, city life to get away from what they're doing back in their native lands, right? So the way migration in India usually works is a lot of migrant workers in the city have two lives, right? Two modes of earning livelihood. One is during normal months of the year, or well, normal as in the times when they're not harvesting back home. They work as migrant workers in the city, whether it's in construction, whether it's in factory, whether it's production. And around March, early spring, when it is time for sowing the seeds, they go back, they plant the seeds, come back to the city, and post monsoon, around monsoon, when it's time to harvest, they actually go back and harvest stuff, right? So it's this constant influx of people coming to the city and then going back to balance their life in the city, but also manage the architectural production. But what you're saying is we can move whatever they're doing back home in the rural areas to the city itself. So in a way, it's kind of challenging the whole idea of migration, like to its very core. Now, I don't want to dig into it too much because I know it's like a speculative design proposal. So we're not like writing a manifesto where you've thought about like all the moving parts, but it is radical in the sense that you're taking away one large part of their life and moving it to the one place where they are going to escape from, whatever drawbacks that particular life has. And a lot of people also seem to be gravitating towards newer ways of farming, right? So there's even in a place like Ahmedabad, a huge boom in hydroponics. There are a lot of enthusiasts who've taken up large shared space. A lot of people even do it in like basements of their houses or buildings and set up hydroponics farms. So, farm to table, but like not a farm as you would imagine when you were younger, but like a farm without a farming without soil. And this eliminates the need for soil, but also like by extension eliminates the need for land that you would like plow and everything that goes into it. Whereas you think we can devise like a new urban network where we mobilize land for food production. That's my understanding of your work, but tell us more.
Wow, and like I think, and you're also highlighting quite a realistic picture that migration is there. But I think
that's a flaw. I'm too pragmatic and practical. I fail to dream, so ignore that if you want to.
And that's I mean, yeah, on one level that is totally relevant, and that's exactly how this kind of idea about getting into this whole speculative design exercise, what we did as imagining Delhi as an agro-city in 2050 is about that we do understand, and we are kind of in a real world we have all these big questions that as a person you really can't handle them because you can't be informed much, or like at that level where you can talk about those things, because these things are really complex. And that's where I think this kind of speculation starts to make sense when it comes to whatever these problems are. So I think in that project, as I was describing that okay, in thesis it was all about Mandi as a typology and what you can do in it. That was almost like okay, this is the starting point. You don't know where this can go. This was based on this hypothesis. Okay, everybody will do urban farming. But in this case, so two questions that we kind of started with was kind of like this. That first was that who will grow our food, and in the context that you imagine, okay, in the present context, you can hear almost like every other day, week, or whatever month that this is happening with this farmer or these farmer groups. We have seen this like a big farmers protest, and we constantly see this struggle, that how farmers are struggling with the food production and everything is kind of upon them. And then it gets to pictures like whether they are not getting good beans for their food, or whole thing about they have to safeguard it with different, what do you call them, okay, all these pesticides, chemicals, and all that, so that they have to safeguard from these organisms. So in that regard, that was first. And then the second was that the climate change or the climate emergency is also real. And almost like, again, like maybe in hypothesis, but conventional farming might not work in the coming future. So we need all these new kind of innovation in farming. So kind of basing in that, we almost realize that we need to think about it more from the perspective of an ecosystem, if I can loosely say so. So, and what does that mean? That means that even before you getting down to all these briefs, that what you can do in these infrastructural changes, you really need to understand what's happening at the core. And that's where we realize this. Even in the talk of urban farming, a lot of people do kind of project that as one of the solutions that city can employ, but we don't really ask them that who will do urban farming. Surely people don't have time. And even if they are doing it as a hobby, okay, you have some planters maybe in your balcony or terrace, but there is no serious thought to it. And that is not about being sustainable. But these are almost like these other examples, or like another narrative to this is that first of all, we need a huge kind of innovation in this farming industry already. And leaving farmers out from that talk is kind of, I feel, it's maybe not good to have here. Like you have to include farmers, because we are also seeing that farmers, the lack of these kind of economical benefit, more of them are now opting out, or they would see that okay, my kids won't do farming because it's really not worth it. And so in that way, we are also losing that whole lot of wisdom and whole lot of knowledge about how do you grow your food. So that's where we felt that okay, like even in just of kind of keeping these two major actors, one would be these producers, these farmers, and one is the consumer. What if they cohabit? And then how will that start to change the picture itself? And in that regard, one thing is that when you kind of place them together, okay, you have to talk about a lot about policy interventions, technology, whether the environment is right or not, and what are these infrastructural inputs can happen. But once that starts to make some sense, and that also that in our process, we always say that it's like a iterative process. You really cannot judge where you can arrive at, but it's almost the energy lies in that sense of collaboration. And I was reading this interesting article where there were, just a little offshoot, but they were talking about that, how housing crisis is also impacting innovation. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And basically the genesis was that this proximity of two different people from different discipline creates a lot more innovation than, if they are placed in different, almost like different cities or city or a village. And that kind of also stayed with me that, oh, we never thought it about like that. And that's where I think, keeping them together makes sense. And this is also about that, this has to make business sense as well. So why farmers should come to cities as well, and then hold this thing about that, okay, in city you have like real high state values.
That's what I was actually getting at, because I do want to focus exclusively on the role of farmers in this, unlike this once trending idea of terrace farming in architecture schools. It's like a whole like era, you talk about any housing project in the city, and even the renders would show these like green little patches. There's a whole movement, when terraces started becoming green. First there were roof gardens, because Corbusier is like, oh, 5 points of architecture, gotta have a roof garden. So we started with the garden, and then somebody had a thought of, what if this garden becomes a farm? And so like suddenly all architecture school students are assuming that residents would grow their own food, which problematically assumes that everybody is interested in farming. It's not a case, because it is an intensive activity, right? Like farming needs time and effort and work and skills, of course. But your project integrates farmers into this process of production. How do you think this would work? Are we, by extension, of course, within the bubble of speculative design projects, are we saying that farmers will continue doing what they do in villages, but now in cities? Or are we preventing farmers from switching to other modes of livelihoods? And if we're saying that they'll now live in the cities and then work in the cities, or like farm in the cities, what happens to all those farmlands back home? Because then those are untended, right?
I think you're highlighting a really important question as well here, which is, and I think to respond to that, I would just take a step back, and in the sense, I would like to respond that with the kind of intent you kind of start to address these sort of issues. But in this way, so when we sort of vision this, and that this is also important part about visioning, that what is your intent. So in this case, we are not saying that in okay, cities are will have all the farmers and then they will become also self-sustainable. It is almost like an iterative process. Once it start to happen, it's gonna find its own kind of equilibrium. And not all cities cannot consume all farms. That cannot happen. But it's almost a thinking that Delhi being just an example, or in this case as an example, but we also have like upcoming cities as well. So it really talks about that, placing farming as also part of a city fabric. And then start to explore where this can go. And again, like this depends a lot on those collaborations, all these prototyping as well, loosely saying.
That's a very interesting point.
So I mean, so that's where I think this question would start to make sense. That again, like people were saying, okay, city is going to become self-sufficient in terms of their food or whatever things. I personally don't think that's the case, because really, like, look at the numbers. In that regard, I think it's really important to understand why this vision in the first place is actually about, first of all, giving farmers an opportunity to also literally get into maybe innovations in business side of things as well. Like, maybe like connecting with consumers directly. That can also pave way for new models. Another thing that we, in just almost like imagining that as a scene, we also propose that how farming can be looked as a service, almost how we see as a mali in our houses. This can also be like a case where as a okay, I'll just paint a picture that there is a gated, kind of gated community or gated,
Sure.
gated colony.
Society, yeah.
Society, let's just say, yeah, you have bunch of houses and they all get together. And then, let's just say, okay, there is some policy where everybody kind of incentivized to have certain amount of farming space within their houses or backyards or wherever you
Sure.
can find a space. Now, obviously, you don't have enough time to get into farming, but you have a space. So what you do, you kind of employ farmers as a service provider. They
Like
would
a
come to your,
SaaS tool in technology, it's like farming as a service.
yeah. So they come, they will take care of those, that farming production, and maybe one household is just growing carrots. Another household is making maybe tomatoes, or another household
Sure.
is making just potatoes. And then as a society, they all come together and they say, maybe we can also do this almost like barter system.
Yeah,
And in
yeah,
this
yeah.
future world, you can almost say this, oh, we're gonna use this major hyper blockchain,
Or
and then we're
even
going
like
to
a
redistribute.
cooperative system, right? So
Yeah,
whatever gets produced goes into this co-op, and from the co-op, people take what they want for use, and you pool your resources together.
yeah, and that's basically a picture as well, that farmers can they can literally take out that pressure of managing land, pooling resources. That's, as a consumer, you are providing, and
Yeah,
farmer is just coming with their skills.
sure.
And that might be a win-win situation for different
Yeah,
both the actors that way. And again, not saying that that's okay, that society will become self-sufficient,
yeah,
but it will be a start point where, as an individual, you have a better connection with food that you are eating,
yeah.
and you'll be more aware about and this, personally, I believe that you should really know what resources you are using and where they are really coming from, because we
Yeah,
tend to take things for granted when we have all these facilities
yeah,
present
yeah,
in a city.
yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of also a point where it's like, oh, that makes sense. How
Mm,
about we prototype something like this? So
mm.
that's where we are at. We have like all these kind of speculation, and yeah, one day we would like to prototype such.
But because you're speaking of prototyping, there's this other tangent that I was thinking of, again within the speculative design bubble, because increasingly as the population rises, and apparently one of the recent studies that we've now peaked in terms of population, now will either plateau or it'll decline. We are facing an increasing lack of public spaces, right? The cities are becoming denser, or they're just like growing radially, like Ahmedabad on the outside. And because of migration, there's a lot of people coming, there's equal amount of resources that are being consumed. So let alone have like urban farmlands in like neighborhoods with skyrocketing real estate prices. One would think, why don't I just like build something here and rent it out, because then I get like money. Like, would the conversion of existing public spaces into farmlets contribute to the scarcity in some sense? I'll tell you why. Very interestingly, yesterday, once our class got over, we ran into a friend who studied urban planning, and he works in the social service sector. And I had this other friend who's from Delhi. We were just talking about the farming shepherding community, and there are a lot of Gurjars in Delhi, in like the outskirts of Delhi, who used to own a lot of tabelas. Okay,
Yeah,
so buffaloes, cows for dairy. What happened with like the new town plans that were put into action is that that land kind of got and enveloped within the city, and suddenly this person realized, why should I give this prime real estate to my buffaloes when I can actually get cheaper land outside, move my buffaloes outside, and then convert these cow sheds, buffalo sheds, and tabelas into rental units for migrant workers. Okay, this is verbatim, this is what he found in his research.
yeah,
Okay, and so what they did is they converted those cow sheds and buffalo sheds, literally, like how they park like horses. Is like a tabela here, then you have like a column, then you have another. in those places where they had columns or whatever, like in the shed, they put partitions. And then you had these rooms there where each room would be sublet to, say, like 4 or 6 migrant workers. And all of those migrant workers would pay 4,000, 5,000 rupees in rent. And he's like, this is not the kind of money I would have made if I was just selling milk, because the kind of resources you put in, you have to feed the buffaloes, you have to vaccinate them, you have to blah, 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 blah. You have to pasteurize the milk if you're not giving it to like a co-op. And so apparently that's a trend that's happening in the peripheral, like peri-urban areas of Delhi. Is they're just like, I'm just saying, I'm provoking you. How do you think real estate would work in that sense? If like you have, it's a carrot and stick thing. It's like, if I have like a bigger carrot dangling here where I can just use my land and like get more money, why do I even want to like take all this hassle? Just a provocation.
No, that's a valid one actually. And then what you're also touching upon is an important aspect that when we imagine city, they're not always all these buildings and roads and every infrastructure, and you can't see much open spaces or like these farmlands. And even in Delhi, you have a lot of peri-urban areas where still people are doing farming
Yeah.
on their lands. And again, rightly said as a case that when the certain developments are happening around, uh, there is an increase in that land prices,
Yeah.
and then they tend to sell for whatever development reasons,
Yeah.
shopping malls, housings, whatever.
Sure.
So in this case, I think in this case, what we are also kind of imagining is something also within those city centers where you can see that there are no maybe enough spaces where you have already allocated to roads, to these maybe green parks and all these dead spaces as well, disputed properties or whatnot. So and also buildings, those are still abiding by these bylaws. So for
Yeah.
example, in Old Delhi, you can't make a house more than 4 stories. So
Yeah.
you still have an
Yeah.
access to terrace. And then again, I think you also touch upon a good thing about okay, what about those public spaces? And in that sense, I see that point, and though I would like to highlight that I think in Indian context, our understanding of a public space is
It's
actually
very different.
on this
Yeah.
these chalks or
Yeah.
gullies. They make our kind of public spaces as contrary to those buildings. And we were also
I would
talking about
actually
these
say now, like the
bungalows.
contemporary public space is actually probably a mall, because of how cities have grown and the means and methods of transportation has changed. You're
Yeah,
not really like walking in the city anymore. Like our cities uh, are not as walkable. If you live in a large city like Delhi, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, in Ahmedabad, usually people choose to drive their own vehicles, but Mumbai, you take the local train. Like your public space that you encounter in your daily life is most likely a railway station.
yeah.
In Delhi, unless you're lucky to be living in known Delhi, so hopefully have your chowks and chorhas and everything. But I mean, imagine you're living either in Noida or Gurgaon and you're like going and like commuting elsewhere, or if you live in Delhi and you're going to Gurgaon and like the DLF, whatever cyber city to work, your public space is most likely like a mall or a food court.
Yeah.
That's my reading.
Yeah. And yeah, I think in terms of housing typology, it's also something. Yeah, I was again coming to that as the second case, which is you see this example of Noida or Gurgaon or any other part of a city which has this skyscrapers, in the sense these high-rise housing societies. Again, coming back to certain bylaws, they can still make those towers, but then they also have to allocate some kind of open space to that.
Sure.
And then their response as a design thing that, okay, we're going to make like a green park or like a green land where you would like, okay, the cost of maintenance is so high, nobody can step on that grass. Then,
And nobody does, right? Because
yeah,
cities are getting hotter. I mean, imagine Delhi or Ahmedabad peak heat. You have like a fancy building with like this patch of grass, very well manicured grass lawn outside. who's going to sit there and have lunch? You'd probably get a heat stroke if you want to like go and have lunch there.
And I mean, to that, this is also part of that speculation that how about we find a new normal
Yeah.
about all these useless green spaces that you
Yeah.
also, putting a dent in your pocket to maintain, and thus you are not letting people to actually access those spaces.
Yeah.
Can they be on the, maybe, you gave a certain part of that land to farming? Will that make sense? How much, again, like, I can hardly comment on that what would be the right proportion, and this is where series of prototyping or doing certain interventions with time would can give better clues to that. But that's where kind of this is arriving at, that we have a lot of space, even when you talk, at least in the context of Delhi. Again, I can't comment on, I don't know, Ahmedabad or like Mumbai kind of a place, but as a city in Delhi, there is a lot of space, and we are yet to define how to use
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
And that's where this picture is kind of,
But that's also probably something you guys can prototype. It's just like go to Cyber City and be like, this is all this space that nobody uses. Why don't you produce something in it?
yeah.
I'll take credit for that idea.
Yes, we're gonna credit you.
So now with this wonderful speculative provocation design project that you have, what is next for you and what's next for AFT? What are you guys up to?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So I think at AFT we constantly, talk about, okay, let's just look at our past work, our present work as well, and where we are kind of heading to. So increasingly we are realizing that, as a practice, as individual as well, we are really interested in the future of habitat. And when we say the future of habitat, that means that it can be about future of mobility, future of food, future of waste, future of water. And basically, that's the purpose that we are kind of driven by right now. And that's where AFT is kind of heading into. And we do understand that these are quite big problems. So really, how do you kind of, get into even this, that can you really do something about it? Like you're talking about food production, what can you do on what scale? And in that regard, we would just like to say, okay, why don't we just start small and see where this goes? So that's where our kind of approach comes in, where we call it like an iterative approach to architecture, where you literally start with these small experiments. You start engaging with either relevant stakeholders, try to test some prototypes, pilots, and kind of increasingly get to maybe like a bigger provocation and try to intervene at maybe bigger scale and see where this goes increasingly. And instead of saying that, okay, I have this one vision, we're gonna take this big land piece and we're gonna do I don't know, like some big project, and that will fail. And so that's not really what we are after, and that's where we are at, that, let's just start with these small experiments and see where they go. So yeah, but I think as just to summarize, I think it's really focused on future of habitat, and not saying that, oh, we are doing this in the future, but we really want to start now. Because this is another piece where, in speculative design, you will be like so much in future that you think that, you can't do something in the present. And that's where this kind of attitude you need, that, no, you can do something in the present as well. Start now.
Yeah, hey, you know what? Somebody once said that there could be a phone where you can touch and operate, and that person, everybody thought was crazy. So here's to future. Thank you so much, Depanshu. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, as I was saying, this was kind of my first podcast. So yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for inviting us.
Special thanks to Ayushi Thakur for the research and design support, and Kahan Shah for the background score. For guest and topic suggestions, you can get in touch with us through Instagram or our website arcofcenter.com. both of which are ARCHOFFCENTRE. And thank you for listening.